is exposed precisely by an experience of finitude, because the human at its limits, so to speak, is the structure of exposure to something other than human, inhuman, if you will. That structure of exposure, as I'd come to understand, was available to thought in some measure through a consequent grasp of what Heidegger and Benjamin had described in their singular ways as the essence of language. Just a little bit more on this argument. The argument I tried to advance here was, in fact, relatively simple. Heidegger had shown that to think the essence of language, human language at least, we must think how the human, something he calls the human, lends itself to language. If the event of language is unthinkable apart from something Heidegger named a use of the human for this event, then it follows that the path to the essence of language is also a path into this usage. This is the entire movement of Was heißt denken, or on the way to thinking, or what is called thinking, follows this movement into what he calls usage. And the last texts on Parmenides are about this structure of the relation between being, human being, and language. Language's speaking or presence, as Foucault described it, will always bear the trace of this usage, this human share in the advent of language that is in excess of language itself. From there, we can see that any communication of language, as Benjamin understood it with notions such as communicability, Mitteilbarkeit, or translatability, Übersetzbarkeit, any communication of language will always entail a communication of something of human finitude, or what I've called the structure of exposure that human finitude entails. The pedagogy I proposed on this basis was a pedagogy that involved attending to the communicability of language in its very material instantiation each time it is brought forth as language, which is an event that is repeated whenever art, not just literature, but any art comes about as such. We have, in effect, a performance of language. This is an event in which, as Heidegger said, die Sprache spricht. Language happens. Language is occurring. And in that event, to the fact that there is a communicability, language speaking, there must be a trace of this dimension of the human to which I'm pointing. Hence the exposure to the disaster. Lyotard described this event in terms of an artistic gesture. But I believe I agree with him in thinking that thought itself is capable of such a gesture when it draws upon language to go to the limits of the concept. Following Heidegger, in other words, I was moving back from the question of language, which I take as the medium of our work in the humanities, to fundamental questions about human being, and I found I was opening onto the fundamental questions posed in psychoanalysis concerning the experience of sexual difference, the opening to reality, and all these questions of origin that are the stuff of primal repression, and those first questions posed by children